Now this is a really quick pen sketch that you're watching in my actual drawing time of 13 minutes. So quick sketches are great. They're a good way just to capture something of a moment, and great time to sketch is when we're on holidays, which for me was when I took this photo. However, this drawing style and technique would be very suitable if I were sitting there in front of the Arc de Triomphe drawing this on location. So because it's a quick sketch rather than a more considered drawing, it's going to be a bit rough and ready, and that will be part of the feel of this sketch. I use the word sketching for something that is a faster grab, a rougher, more approximate impression, but sometimes capturing a liveliness that can be lost in a drawing, which in my thinking and my use of the word is a more considered activity work. So this is definitely a sketch, so I'm very consciously working the clock as I draw this. So you'll probably notice a few more compromises with accuracy. But the other thing that I am wanting to do though is to have a demo where the architectural detail of this is still captured in some way that ties in with the overall, not roughness, but kind of briskness of the drawing technique, the drawing style for the rest of this. When we do a subject such as this, one of the problems we can have is we do the overall structure fairly quickly, but when we come to the detail, somehow we get bogged down and we start to try and draw it too precisely. And even if we do it well, it ends up just not looking like it quite goes with the rest of the drawing. Almost like we make the rest of the drawing look not so good, because it's almost as if we've drawn two different drawings. So how do we capture the detail in a quick sketch? And by the detail, I'm talking mostly about these decorative carvings. Now we have some relief carvings of a long scene along the top. We have two square panels on each side in the top. We have some arch triangular sections above the actual curve of the arch with figures in them. And we have these very large, almost in the round, sculptures on each side at the base. Now, if you're watching while you're listening, this is also a demo that you can see as to how I draw this scene freehand in ink. So there isn't any pencil involved, and there are a lot of dots and marks, and you can see me going back and forth comparing how things align in the photo in my drawing with things I've already done. And in real life, I do the same thing. The first thing we draw takes a bit of a commitment, and we spend a bit more time on, I think, to get it in proportion and in scale. But once we've taken that time and done that, then we get to use that as a reference point, as a measuring stick. But I'm just pushing on now with getting, if you like, the framework done. Now I did that dotted line there because I wanted to establish where it was, but a straight line wouldn't have been helpful for the detail of the figures and the car that I need to put there. So it was to establish a line without drawing a line, which wouldn't have been helpful at the end. I find those dotted or dashed lines incredibly useful drawing directly in ink. And my figures, here's someone I think taking a selfie or something. My figures are also pretty rough here because it's the name of the game for this drawing. I'm using a 0.2 Copic multi-liner pen. Please hit the like button if you're finding this interesting, and in a moment we will get to the detail and I'll be able to talk you through my technique of drawing the effective detail, which I use in virtually every drawing I do, but to see how that technique applies to architectural reliefs and sculptures, rather than crowds of people or leaves on a tree or masses of trees together or grass or gravel or any of the other subjects, where it's a very useful way of seeing our subject and then translating it into marks on the paper with whatever we're using. So now I'm crossing to the other side of this. So we're 5.5 minutes in, which is getting close to half time, and we haven't actually drawn half of it yet. So it is going to be a fast second half. But once I've established these, if you like, larger spaces that then the decoration will go into, that will really speed things up. I'm still having to look back and forth, checking angles and proportions and scale more. Now here we have a geometric pattern that I'm basically replacing with that quick spray of lines. You know, I did warn you at the start, I'm adapting my normal drawing the effect of detail technique to a very fast sketch context. Faster than I normally would have drawn this and faster than I normally would have done the detail. But what I hope you'll see at the end is that it's still a very effective way of doing a quick sketch where all of the sketch is quick and it has a consistency, but we can also read what it is. So what I'm doing is, I found where the main head, the main character's head is, and I basically just look for the arms and I put the arms in. What I'm not trying to do, I'm not trying to draw a figure. I'm trying to look for, if you like, geometrical shapes that I can see clearly, and then I'm just copying those. And I'm not trying to connect everything together into a figure, because that would look, that I just can't draw a figure accurately this small. So I'm looking at things like the torso shapes, where we have blank spaces. I'm not thinking of them as bodies, I'm thinking of them as shapes and spaces, triangular spaces that are actually between the legs, but I just see it as a triangular space with some sort of texture behind of detail. And where we have robes and gowns, clothing, figures that is gathered in certain spots, I'm looking at where the fabric is pulled to a certain part, whether it's a waist or a shoulder or a knee, and the lines that it creates. And I'm drawing those in, but I'm not thinking of fabric, I'm just thinking of the lines and the shapes. And I'm also thinking of the values as well, the lights and darks. So now you see me doing the other side where we have a very different grouping. I think there's some sort of flying angel blowing some sort of trumpet, I dare say announcing a great military victory. Whereas the figures on the other side, I think, may represent France achieving a great military victory. And you can see what I've done. Now, remember, we can't judge the effectiveness of these until the whole drawing, the whole subject is finished, because part of the way we read what's happening is through the overall context. So now we've got, if we look carefully on that side, we've got some figures and there's sort of a row of heads and then bodies, and the same on the other side. I've realised at this point that my panels aren't in proportion, which means the shape behind them isn't in proportion, but I'm going with that now because that's what it is. And as I said at the start, these are the sorts of compromises that we make with a quick sketch. But hopefully we learn not to make them as frequently. This is a faster drawing than I would normally do. But it's a fun exercise to do, to push ourselves to a time limit, to a clock time, and saying, I will finish in under 12, 13, 14, 15 minutes. Because sometimes we can learn really important things about line work and taking risks and being more gestural that we won't learn if we don't shake up our normal way of drawing. if you're feeling that your drawings are looking very much the same to the point of perhaps being a bit boring or stale, it probably means you've outlived that way of drawing, that you've been in that place for too long and there's nothing new, or there's no energy left in you doing it. It's become a real routine of method, of technique that you basically plod through. So this is the sort of exercise that is fantastic to help you break out of that. So now I have these figures. I keep wanting to say spandrels, but I'm sure these aren't spandrels. I think they're more of a 3D corner sort of shape. But I want to give a hint of these stretched out figures reaching hand to hand. But again, I'm not trying to draw the figures. I'm trying to just create a sense that they're there. And I want the effect to read as architectural relief, not to read as someone's crawled up there with a big black pen and drawn a bad human form there. So now we have this long frieze that goes along, and again, highly simplified, trying to get the scale correct. The bits I do draw, I want to give a sense of lots and lots of figures stretched out in a line. But in some places, we have horses and we have less people and we have a few different things happening. There's probably some wagons with wheels for different reasons, maybe a cannon or something. So trying to give a sense that there's a long stretch of carved relief along there, but we can't afford to take too much time in doing it. Please hit that like button if you haven't already for me. So all of this architectural decoration is being done in the same brisk, going for the effect rather than the detail, the accuracy of detail way. And that includes these trig lifts along the top and the circular medallions that sit between them. And it's important to still try and get a sense of foreshortening, that they're thinner and narrower and closer together down the further end than they are at the closer end. And you'll notice how I do it. I do the same element across the entire width that I find lets me be a lot more accurate and consistent in the scale and in the spacing. If I need to be making each one, as I move to the right, slightly wider, it's easier to do that if that's the only thing you're doing. And it's very helpful to notice things in the reference, such as these little rounded bumps on the top of that cornice. They line up with the trig lifts beneath, and that's a way we can make it easier for ourselves to do that. Now it's time, just for in the dying moments of the time for this, to do some quick gestural background. Very rough and ready, but it's always worth the investment to give a bit of context. It can stop our subject looking like it's just floating in space, as if gravity's disappeared and everything's just drifting around. It takes just seconds to suddenly visually anchor what we've drawn and to give that stronger sense of reality, which helps us to identify it and to read everything correctly. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Hope you have a go drawing this. I'll post the reference photo on my channel post page. Why not have a go? But in the end, whatever you draw and however you draw it, however rough or gestural it may be, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.